Greetings. I'm Madeline, sometimes known as Melly Pullman, one of the authors of this paper. I'll go through the background of the study, then the research design, findings, implications for managers, and future research opportunities. First, a bit of background. We're looking at the emergent cannabis industry in this study. For the record, the informal name is marijuana, but we will use the scientific term cannabis. Here you can see that within the family there are a number of strains, and within the strains, a number of varietals. We're particularly interested in how the regulatory issues affect cannabis supply chain management. In the last few years, many countries, provinces, and U.S. states have legalized cannabis in some form. Currently, 24 countries and 33 U.S. states have legalized it for medical use, while 5 countries and 11 U.S. states have legalized it for recreational use. Why is this important? Well, the global legal cannabis market is projected to reach $74 billion in sales by 2027. So it's important to understand how cannabis businesses and supply chain managers navigate this challenging regulatory environment. Our study takes place in the US. In the US, cannabis is classified as a Schedule I drug by the federal government, similar to drugs like heroin, LSD, and peyote. This means that the feds believe there is no accepted medical use and that the drug has potential for abuse. So this restricts medical doctors from prescribing it and prevents interstate commerce. And one can be arrested for growing and possessing the plant. However, there is extant medical research that contradicts these positions. Countries like the UK and many others recognize the use of cannabis for medical treatment: epilepsy, seizures, nausea, pain, and many other treatments. This difference of opinion has led to countries and states changing their laws. Narrowing down the scope further, our research looks at Oregon. The state legalized cannabis for medical use in 1998, and then legalized recreational use in 2016. At that point, there were very few other legal situations from which to draw regulatory experience. As a result, Oregon state legislature developed laws and agencies to regulate the industries as the companies were starting and ramping up to face the expected large market. Many new products and processes had not been considered by the state before, so there was constant change and churn in the legal requirements and enforcement, pretty similar to what you see with rulemaking around coronavirus in the past year. So we're going to refer to this space as the cannabis ecosystem. The actual supply chain of growers and manufacturers, here we call those value-added producers, retailers, and consumers, is supported by other suppliers and testing facilities that test at various stages to ensure that A, pesticides and residues do not end up in the product, and B, that the potency level on the product is controlled within a tight bandwidth. And the entire system is affected by legislators, judiciary, and regulators constantly making and changing the rules as well as enforcing different laws. In the middle of the supply chain sits the tier facing the most challenges, the VAPs. They are trying to make various products that comply with these standards. The laws were not set up to handle the emergent product innovation in this space. As a result, as new products came out, the regulators frequently made restrictive laws, reactive laws, backtracked, changed packaging and processing requirements literally overnight. VAPs were the most vulnerable to these changes. So our resulting research question was the following: how do companies, supply chain managers in Oregon's emergent cannabis industry adapt to an environment characterized by high levels of competition and emerging and sometimes conflicting legislative and regulatory requirements? And what managerial capabilities are correlated with the company's abilities to make strategic supply chain decisions and ultimately survive in this immature, turbulent, and quasi-legal environment? To do this, we went through a process to find the top VAPs. We looked for ones that were listed as the best products or the most popular in the local Oregon press. We ended up with 9 VAPs that we followed through multiple years. We re-interviewed the managers a year after the initial interview and did further yearly communication if they were still in business. All were relatively small. The largest had 100 to 150 employees. New and having varying degrees of success. all struggled with regulatory demands, changing regulations, and fluctuations in the supply and demand. Some were successful, others survived but struggled, and others failed. Why? We use the case studies to elaborate on the theory of dynamic managerial capabilities, an offshoot of the resource-based view of the firm. These are the capabilities that managers use to create, extend, and modify the ways in which a firm makes a living. There are three types. First, managerial cognition, managers' mental models, beliefs, and cognitive capabilities. Second, managerial human capital, skills and knowledge managers obtain through experience and education. And third, managerial social capital, relationship-derived goodwill used to acquire resources and access information, internal or external to the firm. Our findings are grounded in the framework developed by Whitbank that talks about how managers deal with the future. They can attempt to predict, organize to respond quickly, or do some combination of the two. Additionally, they can attempt to control the future to compete in uncertain environments. While adaptability is required to survive here rather than plan, attempts to control the future by influencing the future environment is what really separated the winners from the losers. So essentially, our 9 cases ended up on the continuum of how well they could control the future environment. We ended up with 3 classifications: the maladaptive companies that lacked any control of the market, the managers had weak human capital, meaning they lacked general business and supply chain experience. They had weak cognitive capital, meaning that the managers were rule challenged, for example, coming from the illegal side, and invested in inflexible resources like facilities and machines. And they had weak social capital, meaning they had insufficient social capital to influence the future, such as markets or legislative rulings. Those classified as just adaptive companies had low to medium control of an evolving market. They spent too much time looking at the current market rather than where it might be in the future. They had limiting human capital and mental models, either corporate, consumer packaged goods, or medical marijuana experience. They also overinvested in costly infrastructure, which hurt them financially and personally. They were forced to change by developing new product lines, expanding their social capital, or changing the entire management team, activities that they had avoided for a long time. The transformative companies had medium to high control of the market. In particularly, they used social capital, meaning the regulatory agencies and social networks, to achieve goals and shape their future environment. So we found other interesting things that led to propositions. For example, partnerships comprised of a business person and a creative person. In this case, we had things like an accountant and a chef or food writer, or a business manager and a woodworker. They worked particularly well. People with cognitive models that could increase their resource configuring capacity. Also, the use of social capital to not only build relationships that influence suppliers, retailers, existing and prospective customers. Well, that was key. But going beyond the normal supply chain players to build social capital with industry associations, regulators, legislators, and testing facilities. Finally, there are obviously implications for practitioners. First, consider the managerial capabilities of your team. All coming from one mindset was particularly limiting. Creative industry and different types of thinkers who are good with chaos are essential. We see a lot of similarities here to other predictable environments, such as the ongoing trade war, coronavirus supply chain whiplash, and climate change. Many food supply chains were not adaptable and based on fixed large facilities, like people did in the initial cannabis industry. Future research should build on this study by looking at other states and countries to see how well businesses survive, increase the period of the study beyond 3 years to see how things evolve, and go beyond case research to look at a much bigger data set and test the hypotheses that we proposed in this paper.
What's going on? My name is Aaron Morris. I'm the CEO, founder of Wild. We produce real fruit edibles. We're the #1 edible producer in the country, and we only produce edibles in the cannabis space. In cannabis, cultivating a relationship with your regulator is important. I'm not a networker. I'm not a brown noser. I don't have the meetings. What we do is we try to be absolutely transparent. So this is what I always tell everyone in the cannabis space is you need to be nicer to your regulators because they are state regulators with no experience trying to regulate an industry as the federal government normally would. And so they have no idea what they're doing. They're under budgeted. They need help. And so what they need is help and transparency. So we work very closely with them. We're very open. We have an open door policy with them. We don't ever really get in fights with them. And we kind of just, hey, if you need to develop something, come use our company as a case study. And I'll show you the 28 steps that make no sense. And they're actually willing to listen if you're not just lobbing over angry emails. In cannabis, like all rushes, there's a lot of successes and a lot of failures. There's more failures than successes. Everyone rushes into it. What I've seen in the cannabis space is the two biggest groups that fail. You have obviously the black market people that come from an illicit industry. They enter the market. They don't know business. That one doesn't need a lot of explaining. You can understand what roadblocks they run into. They fizzle out. The other element you have, the traditional business. You have the corporate employees who join the industry, and they have all these grand ideas, and they have all these stands. They what I have call them commas, and they apply traditional business, and they apply business elements that are about 20 years ahead of the industry. And so they spend all their money, they don't see the success, and they don't understand. And so, then they fail. They start pointing fingers, and you know who these people are. These are the $1 million C-suite mercenaries from Fortune 500, and they fall flat on their face. But really, it's the flexibility key. If you're a perfect planner, you'll fail. If you have to know how to forecast and discipline and budget, but if you are coming to this world and how everyone teaches you how to plan, execute, and succeed, you will fail. So you have to plan 6 things at a time. It's crazy. It's not just the regulation, right? You have the industry, you have the infant market, you have the black market, you have the taxes. I guess, you can address that. 280E, everyone thinks retailers in cannabis, everyone's making a ton of money. Retailers are paying 70% plus on taxes. They make little to no money. There's no money in the industry. And so people think we pay higher rent rates, which we do. We pay 3, 4, 5 times rent. We have all these layers in licensing, and people think we just have money coming through the doors. Go talk to other cannabis companies. They're not. Most people are barely able to make payroll, and we're expected to climb a mountain with little to no help. Obviously, with the new COVID, we don't have federal access to any regulations. So for the new example, for the another difficulty with cannabis, for the new FMLA, the 2 weeks for COVID, in America at least, we have to give our employees all that, as we should, no problem with that, but we don't get any of the tax write-offs. We don't get any of the PPP loans. So we're asked to do a lot of things that normal business are do, but we have to pay an extra 5 to 30% more of our revenue to do it.